Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the first meeting of 2025. I don't know about you, but I have to keep reminding myself that it's now 2025. By about February, I'll got used to it. The next meetings, February the 9th, and that will be our AGM meeting as well. The AGM comes along every now and again. So it'll be a half hour early if you want to come to the business meeting. If you've not been before, we don't have a lot of business. We have the accounts, and then we say, does anybody want to volunteer to be chairman or secretary? And nobody does. And then we carry on as normal. And that's February the 9th. It's the next meeting. We've still got one place available if anybody wants to volunteer. Following that is March the 9th. And again, we have one space available. If somebody would like to volunteer, that would be nice. So here we go. We got three excellent papers today. And Richard is going to be first, and then John, and then Cara. You've all had the details, so I hope you're all ready. Somebody in the waiting room. And then, so can we go over to Richard to start?
Yeah. Okay. Where is it? There it is.
Right, we can see that.
Okay. Come along. There we are, up and running.
That's it. Good.
Okay, here we go. I'm developing a database-backed website that will, with hard work, include as much information as possible about the sources of English traditional song, drawing together information about the singers in the way that the Round Index has done for the songs. Cecil Sharp claimed that in the 19th century, every English country village was a nest of singing birds. If this is so, many were of a nondescript species or had become extinct altogether. Early collectors of English folk songs, despite their earnest protestations, were careless about recording details of the people who gave them their songs. And because of this, their stories, and in many cases even their identities, have been lost. Some of the early collectors and many of those who came later were more meticulous, and so better descriptions of the singers' lives and feelings for their songs survive. Recently, there's been a significant turn towards interest in the providers of the songs. Research into collectors now includes the collected. Songbooks mention singers as well as the songs. For example, classic English folk songs includes 21 pages of information on the informants. Its precursor, the Penguin Book of English Folk Songs, had none. Recent reissues of the Frank Purslow series follow the same pattern, and excellent new work is preparing where the singers are the main focus. Websites already exist which provide fascinating details of the singers visited by Alfred Williams and by Cecil Sharp. Both include good genealogical information and much more. Other sites such as Glostrad and Sussex Traditions also contain a wealth of information on source singers based upon their county. So I've started work on and plan to continue to develop an online website giving the life histories of the singers of English traditional songs. The website is up and running, but presently only with a very small data set. The following slides are screenshots from the website. This page shows the basic list of singers and has a simple search, which I plan to extend as the database starts to grow. Other data I'm currently collecting is singers' names and alternate names, marital status, gender, and literacy. Life events and dates, so birth, marriages and death, census records, song collection, other interesting information. Their family details, parents, spouses and children. The song collectors, who they met and when. The jobs they did and when. And the places they lived in and when. And these places are geolocated so they can link directly to mapping sites such as Google Maps. The songs they sang pinched directly from the Round Index, and references to the singers in books, manuscripts, song collections, JFSS articles, and so on, just as you'd expect to find in an academic paper. Unlimited number of free format notes, and all the data will be collected into a short, or in some cases rather long, biography of the singer to give a reasonable, readable summary for the non-specialist. Alternatively, the biography will be replaced to a link to a site where the details can be found. So in this case, Edwin Clay links to his biography on David Sutcliffe's Cecil Sharp's People. Future enhancements will include pictures and links to sound recordings online, hopefully. Steve gave a talk on the Round Index at Whitby Folk Week this year, in which he mentioned the phrase big data. I believe that as it gives this, as it, excuse me, I believe that as it grows, this database will contribute to this. For example, Chris Behrman's excellent analysis of Sharp's Somerset singers was based heavily on census data and was published in 2000, the same year in which Ancestry began to publish census images online. Meticulously documented, it destroyed Dave Harker's loose assumptions. It was an amazing achievement, but must have taken a stupendous amount of work. If that data was brought together in a database, we could test some of the debates about singer demographics, class, occupation, rurality, etc., or examine whether occupation, gender, age make a difference to the type of songs sung. Was there a difference in age, gender, occupation between the singers that the collectors met, or the counties in which they met them? There is much we could learn from this data. Of course, I've had to introduce a few restrictions, and there will be a few problems. The first restriction I've introduced is that, to begin with at least, it will be populated with English singers only. This is partly because I have limited understanding of Scottish, Irish and American genealogy, and partly to keep the project to a possibly achievable size. There is nothing in the technology that would stop the scope being widened in the future. I intend to start the process by concentrating on the singers who were found prior to Cecil Sharp's death in 1924, mostly due to personal interest, but also because these singers have the best genealogical records in the census returns. For singers later than this, only the 1921 and the partial 1939 census are of any help, as the 1931 census records were lost in a fire in 1942. There is also the potential problem that researching and publishing details of people who live more recently is potentially intrusive. This will require some thought. For example, newspaper searchers can reveal much. Unfortunately, some of the revelations can be disturbing. Our working class ancestors didn't usually appear in the newspapers unless they were in trouble. For every report of a prize gooseberry, there are several of assaults, domestic violence, non-payment of bastardy orders, and I suspect as the search expands, many more. Should we make these things public? What do you think? There is also the problem of copyright. The census data is not copyright, but the images are, so they cannot be viewed from the website, and Ancestry will not permit hot links to their data. These images are easily found, however, using the references provided. Other pictures could be included, subject to the owner's permission. I already have 2 pictures of Ella Leather's singers with permission from their families. So here are Mr. Job Hirons and Joseph Priday, resplendent in his uniform. I'd be very interested to hear from other people about what potential problems they can see as well. Okay, you can switch off for this slide if you like. I'll just go through it quickly. The basis of the site is 2 Windows-based programs, both specifically designed for this purpose. Excuse me a sec. The first is a conventional Windows application which enables the collection and editing of the raw data, which is called Singer Index. And the second is a web database application which displays the data and allows searching, which is called SingingBirds. The data is held in two relational databases using Microsoft SQL Server. The first database is the central repository of the collected data and is maintained by the Singer Index app. A subset of the data is then pushed up to a second database on the web host, which is used by SingingBirds as the public interface. Singer Index will initially be used by myself for data collection and entry, although it may be possible to give collaborators access to it in the future. SingingBirds is available to anyone on the internet, although it has a very small data set at the moment, and it has its own domain name, which is www.singingbirdsenglish.org. If you're a non-geek, you can wake up now, but I just would like to point out that all the computer software is written in the programming language appropriately named C#. Okay, what have I done so far? First, I had to acquire a list of English singers. I extracted 6,677 distinct names from the Roud Index with a place name containing England, having eliminated those from New England. I found 965 songs which had no place identified. 321 of these I established as English, mostly from the collector's name, and added them to the list. This gave nearly 7,000 singers. I then eliminated unidentifiable singers with names like J.H.N. or Carol Singers, Girl, Old Woman, Haxie Boggins. There were lots of these. And I eliminated non-English singers, such as Packy Manners-Byrne, who were recorded in England, but no one would ever dare call English. Then there were the mergers. Steve has quite correctly preserved the name of the singer as written in the source document, but that means that there are 28 different presentations of George Pop Maynard within the index and many others. All of these I have merged into single records. Then there were the splits. Frank Perslow had a penchant for publishing Marina Russell's wonderful tunes with more complete texts of other singers, and Alfred Williams too produced texts made up from two or more versions. And in many cases, the Roud Index contains entries of singers who were recorded singing the song together. In all of these cases, the records had to be divided and the songs associated with two or more singers. This process is now largely complete, and it leaves me with 4,945 singers' records linked to their Roud Index details. There will be mistakes and corrections needed, but I now have a basis on which to start building the data. The collection of the data for the whole project will be a massive task. To test out the feasibility of the work and add enough data to demonstrate the project, I've collected data for the singers who performed for Ella Mary Leather, all 58 of them, or about 1.2% of the whole. The core data comes from the websites Ancestry and Find My Past, much used by family historians. The main data comes from the publicly available records of the UK census, 10 yearly from 1841 to 1921, and with a limited census in 1939. And in addition, the birth, marriages and death records of civil registration, and where available, parish registers. Other interesting data will crop up, with details such as military service or legal and criminal records. As everyone knows who's researched using online genealogical tools, there are still many pitfalls. It is a lot easier than delving into the archives for parish registers or reading microfilm. But due to the absence and inaccuracy of data, misspellings by the song collectors, the census enumerators and the transcribers of the census records, and missing or incorrect ages, the task is still painstaking and frustrating. I have decided not to stick absolutely to the genealogical proof standard, but I have been strict in not entering guesses unless they were supported by corroborating evidence. Okay, out of these 58, I have managed to gather details about all but 7 singers. 4 of these were travellers, Mrs. Watton and her daughter Angelina, Mrs. Loveridge and Mrs. Esther Smith. They don't appear on any census records or civil registration documents. Despite this, we know a little bit about them because Ella Leather wrote more about them than any other of her singers, possibly from William Colcomb. You get cases where the singer has been identified by Ella Leather as Mr. Dukes. The closest I can find to this in the locality is a Mr. James Dykes, but I'm having sufficient evidence to put this forward as a published result, so I merely leave it there as a note. Another appears as Floyd in the Journal of the Folk Song Society, and Floyd, or possibly Lloyd, in Ralph Vaughan Williams' best handwriting. I can find a Thomas Floyd in Ancestry. Unfortunately, this is the transcriber's mistake. The man's name is clearly Lloyd in the original. So we don't know what, excuse me a minute, we can't find a definite result for a Mr. Lloyd or Floyd either. And the other singer is just identified as Prosser. So we don't have a name, a gender, an age, or a location. And identifying them will continue to be impossible. One of the parts of the project I'm looking forward to is exploring this is the research of singers through literature and newspapers. I would like to add references and quotations to the database, from the thin pickings of the Journal of the Folk Song Society to Bob Copper's affectionate tributes to his fellow singers. It would be good to extend this search to books that are not specifically about songs. Flora Thompson's Lark Rise to Candleford mentioned singing sessions, though it might prove difficult to find poor old Dave in the census, but this would make a pleasant task to while away a winter's evening. Newspaper searching online is possible now and improves steadily, although it is still a bit hit and miss. Interesting items can be found, particularly for people with unusual names, and this can tell us quite a lot about our singers' lives, deaths, and misdemeanors. The project stands little chance of reaching completion without more contributors. The data I'm collecting is all publicly accessible. There's no information contained in it that is not available for private or public research. I must stress that all contributions to the project will be properly acknowledged. I have no intention of copying other people's research into this database. The basic data I want is census and other genealogical information and public domain newspaper and literary information. SingingBirds will link to the relevant pages on other websites, and reference to research will be cited as in any academic paper. I would invite anyone who has information about our source singers to contact me, and I will be happy to add your material to the repository. I would welcome genealogical data, newspaper and literary references, and local and personal information. If you have researched singers in your area or singers related to a particular collector, or just one singer who sang your favourite song, I would be delighted to hear from you. The main point of the data exercise is to make the data available to both dedicated researchers and the interested general public. The website will be the main gateway for this, but I would look at other ways, for example, producing a PDF of information on one particular singer, or I could produce the whole database in a dump for people who are technologically equipped to deal with it. I would also like, if possible, to link the data in my past. I've already encountered 2 people on Ancestry who were related to one of Ella Leather's singers, and another who was a descendant of Ella Leather's collaborator, Annie Webb. None of them had any idea of this link in their family, and they all found it fascinating. If the project gets to the stage where enough data has been added to make the website viable and interesting, it will be time to look to the future. I would hope that before too long, I can add the ability for users to enter data themselves or to suggest and possibly make corrections. This might involve some idea of membership and maybe a regular newsletter. I would also like to have a way of alerting interested parties that new information has been added, but they could, in opening up the database in this way, have problems with data validation and security. There is nothing, unfortunately, no such thing as future-proof technology. We've lost the British Sound Archive recently and the Bodleian Broadside Ballads. Too many excellent websites have disappeared or stopped working or become virus infected. This can only be dealt with by monitoring on an ongoing basis as technology develops. In the end, to have a long-term future for the data, it would have to be adopted by a group or organisation that could continue to maintain, add to, and make publicly available the data gathered. And almost certainly the data should be placed in some permanent secure repository and updated on a regular basis. So, to finish off, I haven't really got any conclusions at the moment at all. It's still very much an early work in progress. I hope you found this interesting, and I would very much welcome questions, comments, and suggestions. I would also very much welcome additions to the database. Thank you very much for listening. No, where's my mouse gone? Sorry, I've lost my mouse for a minute. There we go. There we go.
Richard, thanks. Great stuff. Thank you, Richard. Of course.
Wonderful.
I think it was wonderful. But we're going to have to start a sort of, a support group for indexers so that we can whinge to each other. We have a few minutes. If you want to put your hand up, go down to React at the bottom there and click on the heart shape thing, and that will raise a hand. While we're thinking about it, don't forget, Richard, that George Pop Maynard, who drives me mad as to what, how to index him, we have a cousin called George Maynard who lived in the next village along. And he was a singer as well. So, that's why he always had to pop in to his distinguished. You probably know this already, but that's just one of the little things.
Yes. There's a lot of little bits
yes, Carol. Don't forget to unmute.
There we are. I think I managed it. Hello. Richard, that was really excellent. I really enjoyed that. I noticed that you had a page from Glostrad on your first slide. My role in Glostrad was actually to do the family history research on the singers.
Your book. It's excellent.
You've read the book.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, just to say, very much in support of what you're doing. You're very welcome to use any of the research that I did in your project. No problem at all. Obviously, not everything I did is on the website. If you need any more information, just ask. I just think it's a tremendous thing to try and get this held centrally somewhere. I mean, we have the issue with Glostrad as to, for the future as well, as to, at the moment we have a committee of trustees looking after it. But for the future, where do we go with that? And it's very much the kind of problem I think you're going to encounter as to where should this data be held centrally and who should be responsible for it. This is something very much in our minds at the moment as well.
Yes, I'm sure that is going to be a problem. And I think, it's something maybe people could get together and have a think about for the future. But it might have to, without invoking the word EFDSS, it might have to have some central organisation who is able to look after the data, I think. But time will tell.
Okay.
I agree. We've all got the same problem in our heads. I have to speed up a bit. So Katie next.
Yeah. Oh, that was great. Really interesting project, and I've done a lot of work in this area as well, which you probably know about. But not just Suffolk, and have done a lot of work on the Vaughan Williams singers in the area, and other people as well. And I've got them on 2 different websites. But I'm very happy to collaborate with you, Richard, and contribute to it. So, and also just to say, you said you were questioning about whether to put newspaper articles, but they are already in the public realm. It's just a matter of linking to them. They're already there for anybody who wants to look at them. I do feel that is an important part of it. And as you said, a lot of people are unaware of this aspect of their family history. And as a lot of us know in this area, that's one of, you get a lot of hits for family historians looking at this sort of stuff. So I think definitely, yes, put it in, however awful it is.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point, yes. There were 1 or 2 examples where I thought, I really don't want to put that in, but I think you're right. It does. Yeah.
You don't have to actually put it in. You can hint, you can describe it rather than put the gory details in.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yes,
Katie.
definitely.
I,
Thank you very
I
much.
once came, I once came across an article in a newspaper about my grandmother being arrested for singing in the street, 1928. Now, I wasn't ashamed of it. I was pleased to find out.
Absolutely.
So, anyway, John Baxter.
Yeah, I was just congratulations, Richard. It's a really excellent project, and Steve made a joke about a support group for indexers, but I think that would be a useful thing, is to have those of us that are really geeky could do with someone who had to share ideas. And just in passing, you flashed the word prosser and said this was you couldn't find. You do know that a prosser is a name, is slang for a pimp.
I didn't know that. No.
Yes. So there was a Prosser's Avenue in London, which was exactly what you think it might be.
Yeah.
But yes, it's an idler or a pimp is a prosser.
It's quite a common Herefordshire name, apparently, but
I don't know how it links to the name, but I just thought I'd mention it. Anyway, I'll shut up now.
Yeah, you learn a lot from our meetings, don't you? Steve Woodbury, our last question on this one. Steve.
A couple of questions. I mean, this is very impressive. And are you aware of, are there any precedents for this? Are there any other geographic areas, New England or whatever, that this is being attempted? And the second question is, you mentioned areas where there's uncertainty or ambiguity, and that kind of nitpicky question. But how do you keep track of those for future reference without having them in the database as confirmed data? I mean, there's got to be some sort of notes or question marks for all these unresolved bits.
Right. Okay. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the program that runs on my laptop contains the data, quite a lot of which is in an unfinished state at the moment. And it only gets released to the website when I'm happy that I've either finished it and done a complete job, or I've researched as much as I can and some areas are missing because I can't find a census record or a whatever. So those will go up onto the website, but the ones I'm still working on will stay in the private side until I'm happy they're fit to be released. So that's the first bit. Sorry, the second question. The first question is, I have looked, as I mentioned before, at some of the websites that are around about England, but I haven't looked at what other websites are available for folk music in the States or Ireland or Scotland either, I'm afraid at the moment. So that's something for the future, but probably not for me. It's not my field of research. Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Richard. That was an excellent start to today's meeting. And we're going to move on. Following on the theme of the newspaper
Thank you.
material, we're going to move on to John Moulden. Hello, John.
Right. Thank you, Steve. I was very impressed with the last contribution. It is, of course, largely based on newspapers, as indeed is this one. It's a slight piece of research in some way, save for the fact that it's taken me the best part of 60 years. But the Derry Journal is the main newspaper, or certainly the main nationalist inclined newspaper in the north-west of Ireland and partly of Northern Ireland. The interesting thing is that while it published songs between 1915 and 1963, it overlaps to a substantial extent with the Northern Constitution's publication of songs with Sam Henry and others between 1923 and 1939, though Sam Henry was collecting for a longer period of time. But we're talking about something that perhaps between the two, they cover in some ways the whole of the north of Ireland. It started when I should have been doing something else. That is, between 1959 and 61, I was supposed to be attending lectures in engineering at Queen's, something I never completed. During that time, I encountered Sam Henry's collection. I encountered collections of broadsides, the substantial collection of F.G. Bigger, who was a bibliophile and solicitor in Belfast, and among them I came across two little booklets, Come All Ye and Old Come All Ye's. These were in the Belfast Public Library, the Central Library in Belfast, and as you can see, these are images of two of those which they owned. Second edition, Come All Ye, famous old Irish songs, 65 popular ballads of the Northwest. And then that one was twopence. And by the time the fourth edition came along, it was called Old Come All Ye's, and the price had raised to 2 and sixpence, massive inflation. Later on, with time, in about 1977 or so, I managed to get a couple of copies of my own. And these are different again. This is Old Come All Ye's, the finest collection, second enlarged edition. And at the right-hand side is a coverless copy of the same fourth edition that the Belfast Public Library had. Now, what I knew and what I tried at that early stage was I tabulated the three sets of contents, the second edition, the second enlarged edition, and the fourth edition. And then in my work on Sam Henry, I came across a headnote that said that The Flower of Sweet Strabane had been published in a Derry newspaper, it didn't specify which one, in 1908. So I headed for the Derry Journal offices, where I ran up against a really quite substantial logjam. They had a couple of copies, but had absolutely no regard for them and no understanding of how they were compiled, who compiled them, or what. But it took quite a long time, in a sense, in that eventually I started taking these things seriously. And in around 2010, 2013, because of the availability of the OPACs, the online public access catalogues of the Irish newspapers, of the Irish universities, WorldCat and COPAC, which is now handled differently, I decided that I would try to find what I was almost certain had generated these little booklets, namely newspaper articles. At the stage when I started, there weren't the online archives, so I headed for microfilm. Microfilm, of course, is handy in some ways because as you scroll gently through, it's possible to spot verse because it has a different format in the columns from the rest of the work, so that it's possible, as I say, to spot verse and therefore to come across it. But the fact that I came across it in 2013 was pure luck, because I'd heard that the editor of the Derry Journal at around that time, William Roddy, was a notable Irish nationalist. And therefore I figured, well, he might be the one who publishes these books with all this material, which is at least partly of Irish nationalistic import. So I started looking in 2013. I can't remember exactly why, but I did. And I discovered that what I discovered was that he had died in 1915, and that therefore I wondered whether in his obituary or in some later issues of the paper, there might be some reference to his publication of songs. There wasn't, but as I scrolled through 1915 newspapers, I discovered the articles that I was looking for. And I have said down at the bottom is that serendipity has one major condition. It happens only to those who are looking. So you have to be looking for something, but quite often you find something charming that you haven't come across. And of course, for much of my time, I was doing this instead of doing something else that I should have been doing. But on the 26th of February, 1915, on page 2, I found The Banks of Clodagh. It was headed Original Version of the Famous Old Comolli, and down at the bottom it said reprinted by request. So there must have been some printing in the newspapers of song works, of song words previously. The next issue, Friday the 5th of March 1915, on page 2, it was numbered number 2. If you will notice, The Banks of Clodagh has no number. So it was a sort of a chance, but it apparently created such a reaction that there were lots of letters and also a degree of controversy over the location of Clodagh. For example, I have just read your reprint of The Banks of Clodagh, but take the liberty of suggesting that the locus in quo of the banks should be Claddagh, County Tyrone, near Strabane, and not, as would be inferred from your version, Clodagh, which is in County Derry. And then another, I'm glad to see you credit Clodagh, County Derry, as being the scene from which the poet drew his inspiration when writing the verses. This is right, though some say it's a Tyrone song. But then it went on to suggest that more songs should be published, and this indeed was the intention of the newspaper. So, number 2, the first newspaper series in the Derry Journal lasted from the 26th of February 1915 with song text and no tunes, mainly one text per week, sometimes with a comment. And after the end of December 1915, it ceased numbering, and after the 17th of March, the Comolli heading was discontinued. But there were approximately 65 items in the series, and there was a proposed booklet. On the 30th of July 1915, the journal announced that it intended to publish in book form all the selections that have appeared in the Comolli column, and this was repeated in subsequent issues. We hope to publish a book of the Comolli songs before the end of the year. In fact, the booklet issued in 1916. As you can see, this is a very tatty copy. The first 48 of the series appeared in this little booklet published in 1916, and it was advertised on the 24th of January 1916 for the first time. Twopence in cost, by post 3p. And it may be noted that in the advertisement, right down at the bottom, the desirability of printing a second edition is under consideration. So that it was at that stage clearly that they had pretty well sold out, and that this had been a really popular venture. And indeed, the possibility of the second edition came about again in 1916, because on the 24th of March 1916, another advertisement advertised the Comolli booklet, with a picture of which we've already seen, with 65 popular ballads of the Northwest. Now, these are interesting. It contains 29, by my count, standard traditional songs. Those in red are known in the local Inishowen tradition around where I live. The green ones are Irish patriotic, and the blue ones are popular songs of the day, music hall songs, parlour songs, and the like. But you can see as you look that these are, in many cases, fairly well known, certainly Irish songs, but some which are known further afield, in, for me, foreign parts. Banks of Coleraine, the Waterloo Priest, Kitty of Coleraine, others, Molly, my Irish Molly, and that could count as popular too, I suppose. And then, apart from the standard traditional songs, there were local songs of events and people, things that, for example, the eviction of a Donegal priest, a very particular event, and similarly that hero Shane McHugh, another event from further west in Donegal, and others, how James Daly was wrongly condemned. But a lot of local detail which is not readily available otherwise. And then general Irish songs, of which there are about 15, and you can see that many more of them are patriotic or of a popular nature. And there were a few that were in the paper but left out. Colin Das Curtha Mo, which actually printed in Irish orthography, and a couple of others. But the possible influence on repertory, even at that stage, I would guess that probably most that had published in 1915 had appeared previously, although newspaper search doesn't turn it up. But a significant number of songs had been found in the local oral tradition, several with Irish patriotic content, and a fair number from parlour, popular, or music hall sources. However, the influence of the newspaper series and its booklets was reinforced later by Nicholas Carolyn's discovery of a further newspaper series in 1933. And this was advertised on the 22nd of February 1933 and appeared, the first issue, on the 24th of February 1933. It copied pretty well everything from the second edition, the 65 songs booklet, and had numbers of other songs issued. Again, the red indicates that the song has been known in the Inishowen tradition. And the series appeared in most of the three weekly. The newspaper published on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And the series appeared in most of the three weekly issues until it ended on the 10th of November, 1933. I can't read that. 33, I think it was as short a time as that. But the second enlarged edition came about probably from that series and contains a lot which was in the paper. It's now called Old Comalies, and this is my copy, which is annotated, purchased 1935. So I reckon it was published around 1935. Now, this is probably the dominant edition, but there are complications because there's bibliographic confusion. You can see a different layout from the previous cover. The Old Comalies is contained in a different surround. And then again, we have the slightly different layout and the slightly different contents, and the addition of a couple of more contents. And to the right, the same booklet, but with the tuppence repriced, overwritten by hand. Even more confusion will come later, but these are the issues which I have so far identified up to about 1939 or so. And I have called these, rather than calling them editions, I'm calling them issues because this, I take it, is the order in which they appeared, and therefore we need to distinguish between certainly 3 editions of the second enlarged and the second edition. But Steve Roud, as usual, has complicated everything because he has this unique copy, the only copy that I have been able to find of the second enlarged edition, but a different coloured cover, Price is printed at 3p, and it has 16 new items, 101 in total, and the contents are largely rearranged. So this is issue 5. So the second enlarged edition had 2 resettings and 1 repricing, and probably appeared from 1935 to the early 1940s. Now, the second enlarged edition, again, the newspapers' advertisements for the various issues help a little bit. On the left, 18th of August 1938. On the right, in the middle rather, 27th of January 1941, Old Camolius, and I take it that that was about the date of Steve Roud's book. And then on the 30th of December, another Camolius book. But the curious thing is that this description in the book does not correspond to any of the copies that I have seen or can find in libraries. No copy of this has yet been traced. The elusive third, which I'm calling the 6th edition. 3rd edition is now on sale. Pieces from Miss Delia Murphy's repertory, while the compilers are indebted to Miss Angela Murphy, that is her sister, who supplied words of the ballads she recorded with HMV. I can't find any booklet of this, despite asking every library which has it listed, and despite certain internet and social media requests. Nobody can produce anything of this kind. But certainly it existed, because advertisements for this issue appeared in almost every issue of the journal from December 1942 to the 14th of July 1943. And it implies that the item had sold out within 7 months. And of course, probably wartime paper shortages may have shortened the issue, and this may account for its non-existence. But anyway, there's another further 4th edition, issue 7. The precise date that this issued is unclear. It may have been as late as the early 1950s, but it was priced at £1, a 4th edition. And subsequent efforts, 6th of October 1956 and the 7th of June 1963, again a 4th edition. But I take it that this is another 4th edition. In fact, I'm sure it is. Newspaper searches on the online British Newspaper Archive allowed me to find a further newspaper series, but it was called Ballad of the Week, and it began on the 24th of January 1958, and there was a welcome for the ballads, and I'm not going to, unfortunately, be able to point out, but there was a welcome for the ballads in comparison with the jungle music which was being promulgated on the radio and so on. This was, of course, the time of Rock Around the Clock, and I remember it well. I was about 17 at the time. But this series in the newspaper was mostly of reprints, but otherwise mostly patriotic. These are some listed, and 32, if you see at the bottom, other songs of the nation. So that this was the assertion, if you like, of the nationalist newspaper's main thrust in all of its editorial, as well as in its song publishing. However, after 1960, at some time, came the fourth edition, which the Belfast Library had, and I had seen in that period, 1959 to 61, when I was mitching off from lectures. Old Comalies priced at 2 and 6pence, and it very much reflected the third newspaper series. There were 29 which were only in this and almost all nationalistic. 41 in total were patriotic, a couple of Orange songs interestingly, and still 15 series. 5 came from Delia Murphy's repertory, indicating that that third edition probably had some, that missing third edition probably had some kind of influence. But the whole thing demonstrates continuity, politics, and the popular. So, tentatively, as I indicated, these two series, the Old Comalies and Sam Henry in a different way, but also for that matter, because they were published in a newspaper, they did have a subsequent effect on repertory. So that the effect on the singing tradition is that I surmise that where words only are published, it implies an active singing tradition, if it's a popular one, even more than Songs of the People, which included tunes in tonic solfa, because you only get a words-only printing tradition if there is an active singing tradition to take it up. The journal worked for half a century, 1915 to 63. Sam Henry, 1923 to 39, and Henry's influence is fairly well attested with the collections of Hugh Shields and McGilligan and Len Graham for slightly further south. But the journal is still with the jury, and I'm the only jury that there is at the moment because nobody else has really seen it. But the Inishowen tradition contained all the songs which were marked in red. Chief among them, I suppose, The Blind Beggar's Daughter and The Irish Soldier's Letter and The Hills of Donegal. And anybody who knows my work on John Shiel, the Drogheda singer and songmaker, will know of his Rights of Man and will know that the only 2 oral versions ever collected were from Frank McPeak's father and John McGrath's father, again through the agency in the first place of Peter Kennedy and in the second of Sam Henry. But they too appeared in the Derry Journal's booklets, and I wonder whether the influence on the survival of those in oral tradition was not these booklets. But anyway, just to look at another small thing, this is a transcription of an account by Annie McColgan of her experience of songs being sung at a bottle night, a night for people going away on emigration. And the 2 verses, gazing back through Barnescop on my own native hill, I thought no shame. And then there are the brackets, oh, who could blame? Now, it's the manuscript is almost identical, including the brackets. Oh, who could blame? If you can read it, it's rather blurred. But the question, of course, is where did the influence come from? Did the singer or the collector own the book in order to set down those words? But it is quite clear, although it's inconclusive at this stage, that there was significant influence in the sustenance of tradition through the agency of these booklets and the newspaper articles. The survival of the books is a bit more parlous. I've listed them in the N1 stands for newspaper first series, B1 for the first booklet edition. And you can see that the survival of each is very small, quite often unique, particularly in the case of Steve Roud's B5 down at the bottom. And the mysterious one, the one which is B6, is completely unknown. And the matter is that for all that these were produced, probably by their hundreds and thousands, only around 25 copies of all issues are known worldwide. So my question is, do you have any of these? Do you know of any, especially the third edition? And thank you. And if I've been racing through this, there are details on my website, moulden.org, although at the moment I haven't quite brought them up to date. But certainly, I would be very glad to hear from anyone who has anything of this kind. And I have well overrun my time, for which I apologize. I shall now stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was absolutely fascinating. Combines all my obsessions all in one. That was wonderful. Thank you.
My obsessions too, by the way.
Can we do have a couple of minutes for questions if anybody wants to raise their hand. I'd like to ask one question, John. We do tend to, with this kind of thing, we look at what's in the book and what's in the tradition. But my question is, what was in the book that's not in the tradition? In other words, how much is there that we think didn't survive?
A fair amount. A lot of the very localized materials, a lot of the very localized songs don't survive local memory of the event. And also, of course, some of the more idiosyncratic things, such as John's Dream, which is 3 full pages of newsprint, and I'm talking about in the booklet, and which, of course, was far too long to be memorized. And there are also mixed in with it a few rather almost literary items which haven't transmitted. I haven't really looked at that. I've been so busy, I must admit, trying to chase up the available copies to be sure that they are how the library has described them and to know exactly what they are. It was only within the last 3 days that, due to the kind agencies of Faye Heald and her august position in Sheffield University, that Sheffield University Library, which actually disgorge to me or to a lecturer at the University of Ulster, whom I asked to see about interlibrary loan for me when they wouldn't release it to me. I've only recently, as I say, had confirmation of the nature of that particular issue, of that particular copy of the booklet, so that I'm still in course, if you like, of looking at what was there and what wasn't. But my main idea would be that if anybody has any idea where that third issue is, it's only a minor point, perhaps, because it's possible almost from the later editions and the 1958 to 60 newspaper series to guess what was in it. But I'm still looking for accuracy in this. But if anybody has any idea, I would rejoice in knowing. And my email address is available.
Thank you, John. Everybody put John out of his misery. We'll offer a prize for anybody who can find this. Anyway, John Baxter, last question, please, John.
Yeah, I just wondered if you'd looked in Australia. I found when I looked at a series of books published by Felix McLennan, which were Irish nationalist songs, two places I found them. One was in Australia because they'd kept them better there, they had better archiving, and the other was in the National Archive of Britain because they'd been confiscated by the police who'd kept copies. So I don't know if you've looked in those sort of the National Archive in Britain might be somewhere to look in London.
Well, similarly in Ireland, the National Archives, the State of the Country papers and the Rebellion papers and the Outrage papers are full of ballads. But I've looked in the National Library of Australia, but I haven't looked in their national archives. That sort of suggestion would again be very, very welcome to where else things might be that don't appear on the either national or international combined OPACs.
Right.
Okay,
Thank you, John. We must move on now, otherwise we won't have time for Cara. Thanks for your questions, everybody. Thanks again to John for a fascinating talk. We're going to move on to Cara.
All right. Well, I'm afraid that we're swinging from two wonderfully meticulous and detailed papers and 60 years worth of research to a much broader and fairly new project that I am getting started with. So all song traditions that I am aware of have songs about particular places in one form or another. But Ireland does seem to be particularly blessed and possibly even obsessed with place songs to an extent that seems quite remarkable when compared to its neighbors. Now, I've long been fascinated with Ireland's place songs, and as many of you know, I recently completed my doctoral dissertation in Irish hunting songs. And one of the things that really drew me to these songs was the prevalence of place in them. Because I knew that place came up so often in Irish song, I sort of naively thought that a lot of work had been done on the topic of place and song. And so I saw the hunting songs as a way of sort of tackling a topic that hadn't been discussed at all and sort of working your way into an area that encounter a lot of song and place research. But once I started my research, I was greatly surprised to find that there's actually not been a huge amount of work done in this area. The great Dr. John Moulden has written some excellent articles and is possibly the person who's done the most work on this, and most of those articles are on his website. And then there's some sort of scattered stuff in the companion to Irish traditional music and some work by scholars like Brendan O'Madigan. And there, of course, has been a lot of work done on regional playing and singing styles, and some work on Irish identity and the sense of place, but there's a huge amount of work to be done on how place is depicted in the songs themselves and what that means and what it was used for and is still used for. So once I finished my doctoral research and was sort of looking for the next project, this seemed like a really obvious place to go to next. And I started by sitting down and sort of writing out lots of questions that I had about place and song and these topics. And as I was writing the questions out, it suddenly occurred to me that I don't even know really how you define a song about a place or a song that happens to have place in the background and, or a song where place is a major part of the event. So I started by looking kind of over the songs that I had seen and collected and sung, and starting to ask myself, how do we define these and what are some broad categories or themes that I can start using to wrap my head around. So today I'm going to take a very broad look at three types of songs that I am currently interested in and their depiction of places within them, and then look at three themes that seem to unite the way place is used within these very different types of songs. And we'll see where we go from there. This is very early research, so I'm looking forward to hearing people's thoughts, and I would take all of it with a little bit of a grain of salt because I may change my mind on all of it later on, but we'll start here and see where we get onto. So the first thing that is important to notice about singing place in Ireland is that we're talking about a vast tradition here. From the 1300s, we have Irish language things that are called topographic poems, which are sort of strings of place names that are linked together, all the way through up to modern day Irish songwriters like John Spillane, who are writing new songs about places or incorporating Irish places within them. In the English language songs, the ones that I'm looking at today, typically we have two sort of descriptive tools. We have discussions of specific place names, specific locations as they would be named on a map, or we have descriptions of landscape features such as down by the river or the Black Bog or something that are local landmarks or descriptive terms. Lots of songs mix both, and some songs have a predominance of one type or another. So today, I'm taking a really broad look here, and I'm going to focus in on examples of three different types of place, or types of songs of place, songs that include events or happenings in a landscape, and then exile songs where somebody is describing Ireland from abroad or after having left it. Now, songs of place are obviously found throughout Ireland. In the case that I'm using of, this is a song that is specifically focused on a place. That's the whole purpose of it, is to describe and maybe memorialize a place. Often they walk through the landscape. Very frequently they seem to use a love story as an excuse to sort of meander around a landscape, but some of these songs don't have a plot at all. They're just sort of verses describing particular places within a landscape. Very often, and we'll come back to this, they associate a place with a particular woman, which I think is a fascinating trend that we will come back to. So we'll take a look here at just one example of a song which comes from the very northern tip, up where John Moulden is at. It's called Ballyliffin, and it's about a place in the Inishowen Peninsula. It's a classic place song in that it describes various locations around a sort of central home place and compares the landscape very favorably, of course, with other famous places around Ireland. And that is a common thing that we seem to see in these place songs, that they compare their particular location with other famous landscape features or landmarks. Somewhat unusually, this song does not seem to have any sort of linking narrative within it. It goes from place to place throughout the verses, but doesn't have any kind of narrative that links it. So here I've put just two, the first verse and the last verse from the singing of Packy McGonagall. And the thing that jumps out, as I said, it describes the place and then compares it to other places within Ireland. But the thing that defines this to me as a place song or a song of place is that it's clearly the work of someone who knows and loves the place very intimately and wants to be able to traverse this in song. There's a real sense of sort of wandering through the landscape, and all of the places within it are places that you can go visit today. I suspect, and we'll come back to this, that this is one of the main things that cause these songs of places to be written, this wish to remember, memorialize, and even capture this place for the future. Then we have the massive category of events that happen within a landscape. Now, obviously, most songs that have, tell the story of an event that happens have some kind of a landscape backdrop to them, a place that they happen in. But some songs really feature the landscape heavily. So you have songs like The Rocky Road to Dublin, where the place is used to move the story along as the narrator journeys along his story, along a physical place, the song moves along. But you also have other songs like the Galway Races, where you have an event that is connected specifically to a place. We're going to look at two examples of songs that I looked at in my own doctoral research, and I want to look at these because you can see two different songs that are both based loosely on actually historic events, and yet how differently they use landscape within the songs. So the first is Michael Hayes, the farmer Michael Hayes, which I gave a paper on 2 or 3 years ago here. And it's the story of a fox hunt in which the fox is actually a man who's on the run after murdering a land agent. And the map here shows all of the place names that are mentioned in the sort of most common popular version of that song today. But this is pretty standard for most versions of Michael Hayes, that they have this massive spread of place names in them. And it's fascinating because since this is based on an actual manhunt, and since we can go through newspaper archives and we can kind of look, we can get a sense of where the actual manhunt took place. And it was a very limited area. It was mostly that sort of southern tip under Limerick, down in the Tipperary area. There's one mention up in Dublin, but that's about it. And most of it is that little tiny Tipperary area under between Limerick and Cork. And yet the song has almost gone out of its way to spread place names all the way across. And these are all the places, most of them, that are visited within the song, with the exception of the farther northest one there, where I think they only telegraph to. But there's a question for me as to whether this was done to kind of include more of Ireland in the story. It ends with Michael Hayes leaving Ireland, which is another theme that we will see come up a lot in these cases. And so maybe he's sort of visiting as much of the island as he can and kind of collecting these places before he leaves. But it is a really interesting visualization of how broad some of the places that can be covered in a song can be. Now, the second one is the Cregan White Hare, and this is the exact opposite. This lower map here shows you the area that it takes place in, which is basically a few fields. Again, this is probably based on an actual event. Very minute area that the actual hunt covers, which is, basically a field and a part of a bog. And then there's only 3 place names in it, Cookstown, Dungannon, and the Moy, which are called afar from the song when some sportsmen come in. And the place names in this case almost serve to heighten the feeling of locality, because the furthest of those places, the Moy, is something like 35 kilometers from the townland of Cregan. So we're suddenly talking about very small places, especially when we're referring to those as afar. So it's a similar plot, a similar narrative, but 2 very different examples of how places appear in particular songs, depicting essentially historic events. Then we have the Songs of Exile, which obviously Ireland has an incredible wealth of emigration songs. And in these, the memory of place is really key. These, they often contrast the memory of a place within Ireland, and sometimes it's a specific place, and sometimes it's just Ireland as a whole, depending on the song. They often contrast that with the current situation in which the narrator finds him or herself. Not always favorably, but usually Ireland is looked back to as a sort of idyllic area. And the song that I want to highlight here is probably not one that you would think of as a sort of famous emigration song of Ireland, but it's got some really interesting features. It's called The Bogs of Shannahever, and it tells the story of an Irishman who is in America, thinking back on a hare hunting in Connemara before he immigrated. Again, the first and the last verse from the singing of Michael McGonigal there. And it's an interesting story because this song, the story that it tells is actually quite sad. A favorite dog of the man's dies as a part of the hunt, but yet the Bogs of Shannahever is very much still presented as this sort of idyllic past place that's contrasted with the wildness of the prairie. And I particularly love the detail in the first verse here where he talks about hunting the deer and the panther and the beaver. And I'd say hunting panther is a very different thing than hunting the sort of harmless hare in Ireland. So that would be a serious change to go through there. But as with many of these kind of songs, in the end, he has this idea that he can return to this place. And so that this, even though it's an idyllic past place, by going back to the physical location, the narrator can reclaim that idyllic landscape. So, as I said, this is a crash course we're getting here today. In looking at really broad scopes like this, one of the things that has interested me is that there are some themes that tend to show up in within the bigger theme of place. that can kind of be pulled out. And we're going to look today at women and place, the idea of nostalgia and the connection of place in the past, and then the idea of songs and the place names as possessions, a way to carry something with you. So the women and place is the thing that jumped out at me almost immediately as I started to look at these. Many of the local place songs involve some kind of a courtship or romance narrative. Not all of them, but it's a very common theme. Very often it's the man who ends up leaving in an exile song and a woman is left behind. Not always. There's some songs where the woman is actually the one singing and the man is left. But that is another common theme within the exile songs. And I suppose it shouldn't be surprising that women have this association because of their association with home and family. And there's some really interesting songs like Australia, Far Away in Australia, where you have a man who has gone to Australia and he is looking forward to bringing his wife to the new country. And you have this sort of symbolic change of the home leaving Ireland and the future then being replanted in the new country, as sort of symbolized by his wife coming over with him. So, but the other thing about this is that it's a little bit broader than just women, because as I was working on my research, the hair is always female in Irish songs. And there's this really fascinating thing that happens with hair hunting songs where they're very often, almost always, in fact, associated with a specific place. So we have the Cregan white hair, and we have the Golan white hair, and we have the Grainmore hair. And this idea that the hair, the female hair, can sort of represent a place, and then generally the escape of that hair reflects well on the local place. And I can't help connecting that with the many songs like the Star of the County Down or the Pride of Petrogore, where you have a similar situation where you have a very beautiful woman who's sort of representing the place and then, reflecting well on the place. So the idea that pride in place is being sort of showcased or represented through a feminine aspect is an interesting thing that needs some more work and teasing out in these songs. And then place and the past. We've already talked quite a bit about this, but lots of these songs involve the idea of the past being linked to this idyllic place. There's a lot of work to be done in this area, and it's not all in song because, of course, this shows up in literature. I think it shows up in folklore. This is a major theme that we see a lot. But it is really interesting, and particularly it often shows up because if you link the physical place with an idyllic past, there is this idea that you might be able to reclaim that idyllic past by reclaiming the place. That's something that shows up a lot in rebel ballads or in political songs. If we think of songs like Skibbereen, you have something similar to that come up. So again, this is a huge theme that stretches through these songs that needs lots and lots of work done on it. And I'm going to close with this is sort of an idea that is forming in my mind. There's an Irish literary scholar actually named Patrick Sheehan who has posited the idea that place names were the most portable possessions. He talks about the Irish sense of identity and the way that place names could be carried around with you as a way of not just remembering, but almost containing a space within you. And I wonder, especially when I look at a song like The Pursuit of Farmer Michael Hayes, where you have this massive map of place names just listed one after another, and then the protagonist leaving at the end, if this doesn't sort of lead us into the idea of these songs being a way to not only revisit a place and a time, but also to internalize that place and carry it along with you, almost like a possession that you could take somewhere along the way. So, in conclusion, as you can tell, these are very rough ideas at the moment. I bit off more than I could chew when I started this project, but it is a place that needs lots of thought. most of these themes and quite a few of the types of songs obviously are also not unique to the Irish tradition. So it has broader implications for other areas as well. And hopefully I will be continuing this in the future, but I'd love to chat with anybody who's interested in this or any of you who have thoughts and ideas on it.
Excellent. Thank you, Tara. Wonderful stuff. We have time for questions. Yep, we have 5 minutes. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, that our conference in April in Sheffield, the theme of the conference is Place in Song. So we're on trend, as always, with TSF. I wonder if I take up a point that you've said right at the end, Cara, about, that it's not just Irish songs that do this. We had at another meeting I was at where we were talking about place songs. I was having trouble thinking of English songs that do this kind of thing.
Interesting.
And we could come up with John Peel and Widdicombe Fair and a few others, but nothing like the copious ones that number that you've got from Ireland. So I'm not sure that other countries do this to the same extent. In which case, that's another question to ask about Irish identity. So I mentioned John Peel, so Sue Allen must have something to say about that. Sue, you've got your hand up.
Not John Peel specifically, but all the Cumbrian hunting songs, of which mention loads and loads and loads of places of fell in the Lake District, etc., etc. But there was also a big tradition in the Romantic period, because Cumbria and the Lake District was such a destination, that lots of places mention local places and people, and more particularly those dialect poets whose poetry went into songs, or who wrote them as songs, do mention songs all the time, masses of them. So I wonder if it's places on the periphery that do this a means of emphasizing their importance, that people possess these places, whereas places in the southeast wouldn't do that to the same extent.
Interesting. Yeah, that would be fascinating. And it is interesting, hunting songs sort of do this almost naturally because they have to describe that landscape, but it's still fascinating the way they change them up and use them and all the amazing things you can learn from those place names. But I have not spent much time with the dialect poets of the Romantic period, so I will take a look at that for sure.
Thank you, Sue. I think you're right. I come from Streatham in South London, and there are no songs about Streatham in South London, as far as I know. Margaret Bennett.
Quite a number of Scottish songs come to mind as places, songs like the Tramps and Hawkers, I've seen the High Ben Nevis, the Calendar and Bonnie Doon, or all of those, and lots of other ones. And Gaelic is absolutely full of them. I think that for these, the Gaelic ones especially, it's a measure of nostalgia. Many of them longing to be back there but can't go. And they go into great detail, and within half a mile or even yards of one place to the other, some of these songs. And I think possibly the Irish and the Scots Gaelic traditions have that resonance, that it's longing.
Yeah, that nostalgia is really key, I think. But yeah, that's fascinating. The Scottish, there's so much amazing Scottish songs that I haven't got to dig into yet. So.
Right, John Moulden,
Oh, of course not.
John Moulden.
I could say a lot.
I was
I
hoping
don't
you
need
would.
to. Cara, we can correspond.
Absolutely.
But one thing which I would refer you to, and a couple of observations. Sean O'Boyle wrote an article in Ulster Folklife, and I think about sometime in the 1950s even, where he said that Irish songs were quite often about that they promoted the idea that within one's immediate locality were the most beautiful women, the strongest men, and the most beautiful landscape to be found anywhere. And it's a nice article. Starts off with very racily anyway. But I would say that even now, there is a very strong attachment to place and place names in Ireland, probably because they are all very, very strongly associated with events.
Yes.
You mentioned the Star of the County Down and the Pride of Petrivore, both of which are relatively recently composed songs. They therefore reflect a past dominant tradition. But there is another thing, that when in the 1980s and 90s, there were attempts by the post office in Northern Ireland to impose road names, street names in the countryside. There was a vast reaction to this, with the result that the townland names, the native names, the locational, topographical, and personal names which have been attached to places have been retained.
Oh, wow.
And just to underline absolutely the importance of name in Ireland, Rosemary, my wife, lives in a town, or lived in a townland called Dunaff. And there she surveyed 48 places which had names, but they had 150 names between them. That is within an area of a few hectares.
Yeah.
Which simply, well, it beggars belief. I don't think that anywhere else would have such detailed place naming and still be remembered. But that's a matter for another discussion.
I look forward to that.
Thank you. We must move on. John Baxter. Too many Johns.
Just very quickly, rather cynically, a lot songwriters for the stage in the late 19th century, songs like The Rocky Road to Dublin, were often sung by people that used place names to establish a link with the audience, to try and to say I am one of you. So Harry Clifton, for whom that song was written, was notorious for going to every town, and it's hello Bristol, and he would sing a song about, instead of it would mention Broadmead instead of mentioning some other place. And The Girls Up Glossop Road, which is more or less where I live, was also sung in Ireland as The Girls Along the Road. So I think there's something about that. The other thing I think there's something about the diaspora, and those songs were sung in the British music halls, both to appeal to a British audience, an English audience, if you like, or Scottish, depending on where it was, Welsh, but were also designed to appeal to the Irish expats, working people that had left Ireland and were working in the engineering factories of Glasgow or wherever. So I do think there's that. I think there may be a stronger association with place for people from Ireland because the link to nationalism. Well, no, I'm going to go on too long. I'm going to shut up now. I'll get into.
No, that's fascinating. Yeah, I think that the diaspora songs, and I had wondered that about the Rocky Road to Dublin, because, as you say, originally a stage song, but it's interesting that even there, they know that it's important enough that they connect it back to those places. So yeah.
Right, but Michael's got his hand up. Last question.
Two quick points, one of which, of course, is, and you already know this, you've said it, but it bears repeating. Localization is one of the formal techniques by which songs in transmission from place to place become located in a place. Localization is one of the ways that you achieve that. But as you were talking, I had this immediate thought. The Irish songs are displaced people. So is it the case, could you do a test case at some point, not early on, by looking at another community of displaced songs and seeing the relative number or appearance of location?
Well, that'd be interesting, yeah.
I mean, I don't want to throw Yiddish at you, but my own, just listening, Yiddish songs in America are full of nothing but place names from Europe. There's a song called Romania, which basically is singing the word Romania over and over and over again. You can't go to an American bar mitzvah without hearing it played. So is that notion of the displaced or
That
deep
is interesting.
people, because that's what the English kept doing to the Irish, and that's certainly the piece you put up. It struck me immediately. He could the second, I forget the name. He can go back to Ireland when it's free. I mean, that
the Bogs of
lyric
Shannon
literally
Yep.
says, "I could go back to her when Ireland, to her meaning Ireland, when
Mhm.
she's free." So it is. So this question of displacement, I wonder, I think may enter into your discussion.
That is very interesting. Yeah, and it would be fascinating to do. I mean, there's so much space that could be done, but that is really interesting to know about the Yiddish songs because I had been wondering about that. Are there
Perhaps some immigrant group that's presently come to London
Yeah,
recently, that
Yeah.
could give you a quick opportunity, just as I mean, it would make an extraordinary test case, even if it was only five songs or something.
Yeah. The interesting thing about the Irish songs in some ways is that so many of them are written by people who didn't leave. In fact, there's some interesting songs in Inishowen they're almost like anti-immigration songs because they're
Right.
like, we love our place and so we're not going to leave it too. But in that can also be a response to the displacement, which is mentioned within the song as well. So fascinating.
And the absence.
Yeah.
So much of this is about what is absent.
Absent,
It describes a presence, but that presence is really about what is absent. No hares, lots of panthers in the prayer.
Lots of panthers, yeah. Yep. That makes for a change for sure.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Cara, for that. That was great. Thank you to all three of our presenters today. A particularly strong and interesting session. And we'll see you all again on February the 19th. No, February the 9th. And don't forget, it's the AGM, so you can sign on half an hour early if you want to know whether we've got any money in the bank or not. So thank you all for coming. See you all again in a month's time. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.